Ready for a deep dive? Today we're tackling the Macedonian language, and we've got some really cool stuff to look at. Linguistic analyses, historical accounts, even some political commentary.
Sounds fascinating.
Right. So, where should we even start? Oh, I know. Our mission today is to figure out what makes Macedonian so unique, where it fits in with the other Slavic languages, like the family tree of languages. And of course, we've got to talk about why it's been at the center of so much debate.
It's a really interesting story, actually. It goes beyond just, grammar and vocabulary. You really start to see how language and identity are intertwined.
I like that, intertwined. Okay, so let's just throw this out there. Around 1.6 million people speak Macedonian every day.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And while most Macedonian speakers live in North Macedonia, did you know it's spoken in other countries too?
Oh, absolutely.
Like Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Romania, Serbia, even communities of speakers all over the world. It's pretty widespread when you think about it.
It really is, and it has a really dedicated following. May 5th is actually Macedonian Language Day.
Wow, a whole day.
A whole day. And it's a working holiday in North Macedonia. They've been officially celebrating it since 2019.
Okay, so they're serious about their language. I like it. But let's back up for a sec. Big picture time. Where does Macedonian fit into, the whole language family tree?
Think of it like this. Macedonian is part of the Indo-European language family, specifically the Eastern South Slavic branch. So that makes them linguistic cousins with Bulgarian, and a really cool, now extinct language called Old Church Slavonic.
Old Church Slavonic, huh? It sounds ancient. I bet the connections between these languages go even deeper than that, though. What about all the languages around it?
Oh, for sure. It's all connected. Imagine a whole spectrum of languages, all kind of blending into each other. That's what linguists call a dialect continuum. Macedonia is right in the middle of it, closely related to Bulgarian and even Serbo-Croatian.
So it's like they all kind of borrowed from each other a little?
In a way, yes. But there's also this really cool thing called the Balkan Sprachbund. It's like a linguistic melting pot. Basically, languages like Greek, Aromanian, Albanian, and, of course, Macedonian have been influencing each other for centuries just by being near each other.
Wow. So even if they're not, direct relatives, they've picked up on each other's quirks just by being neighbors.
Exactly. For example, Macedonian has taken on words from Greek and Turkish over time. It's added a lot of depth to the language.
That's what makes it so interesting to study. But let's talk about what makes Macedonian special, its own thing. What are some of the things that make it stand out from those Slavic siblings we were talking about?
One of the biggest ones is the grammar. Macedonian has actually gotten rid of most of the noun cases that a lot of other Slavic languages have, which can be a bit of a head-scratcher for linguists.
So, good news for language learners. Less grammar to worry about.
It's one way to look at it.
What else is unique about Macedonian? Anything else?
Well, here's a fun fact. Imagine a language where there are 3 ways to say "the." That's Macedonian for you. It's got 3 definite articles, which is pretty uncommon in Slavic languages. Each one tells you exactly where something is in relation to the speaker.
That's cool. Like a built-in GPS for your sentences. You're pointing right to it in the conversation.
You got it. It adds a whole layer of precision and expression to the language.
I like it. So we've got a language with a unique character shaped by its neighbors and with a rich history woven into the Balkans. Speaking of history, I'm curious, what are some of the key events that made Macedonian what it is today?
Well, buckle up. We're going all the way back to the 9th century.
Okay, the 9th century. What's happening in the world of Macedonia?
This is when we see the rise of Old Church Slavonic, the ancestor of so many Slavic languages. Think of it like the granddaddy of them all.
Old Church Slavonic. So we're talking monks, monasteries, ancient manuscripts.
Exactly. And this is where the Ohrid Literary School comes in. It was a really important center of learning and, creativity, really.
So like a medieval language academy, kind of like a think tank for language.
Yeah, you could say that. They weren't just copying texts. They were adapting them, really shaping the language. They actually laid the groundwork for Macedonian literature as we know it.
Linguistic trendsetters. Okay, so what happens next? The plot thickens. Right.
Of course. It's history, after all, never straightforward. In the 14th century, the Ottoman Empire takes over, and for the next 500 years, Turkish becomes the official language. It's the language of, everything, really. Administration, power.
500 years is a long time to be under the influence of another language. I imagine that had a pretty big impact on Macedonian.
Yeah, it definitely left its mark. This is when Macedonian starts to pick up Turkish words and phrases. I've heard some people call them borrowings, but it feels like more of a fusion to me, like a true blend of cultures.
Totally. It shows how adaptable language can be. But even with the Ottoman influence, there's still a sense of, well, a distinct Macedonian identity developing.
Right.
You're right. By the 19th century, the whole idea of Macedonian nationalism starts to gain some serious traction. It's all about self-determination. And right at the heart of this movement is the push for a standardized Macedonian language.
Which makes sense, right? If you have a standardized language, you can teach it in schools, print newspapers, even make it official. It's essential for a nation to, well, become a nation, really.
Exactly. And that's where this guy, Kristi Petkov-Misirkov, comes in. Total visionary. In 1903, he writes this book on Macedonian matters, and in it, he makes this really passionate case for a standardized Macedonian language. He believed that a shared language was the key to uniting the Macedonian people.
Wow, a language as a unifying force. Powerful stuff. So did his dream come true? Did they actually create a standardized Macedonian language?
They did, but it wasn't a smooth ride. Fast forward to 1944, World War II is raging, and in the middle of it all, during the Anti-Fascist Assembly for the National Liberation of Macedonia, Macedonian is officially declared a language. A language. Can you believe it?
That must have been an incredible moment. Decades after Misirkov, it finally happens.
But were there any bumps along the way? I mean, standardizing a language is no easy feat, right?
Well, there were definitely some disagreements, especially with Bulgaria. Remember how we were talking about the dialect continuum earlier? Yeah, the lines between languages in the Balkans can get a little blurry, especially there. So the standardization process, they drew a lot from the Prelep-Bitola dialect, just like Misirkov suggested, but they also incorporated parts of other dialects. And get this, they even borrowed some things from Serbian, vocabulary mostly, and some spellings.
So you've got this brand new official language, but it's already causing some controversy because of its roots.
Yep, pretty much. And this whole debate about Macedonians' relationship with Bulgarians, that's something that's still going on today, actually.
Intense. We'll definitely come back to that. But first, what happened after 1944? What was the impact of Macedonian becoming an official language?
From 1945 to 1991, Macedonian was actually one of the 3 official languages of Yugoslavia. Wow, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Yeah. Think about it. Taught in schools, used in government, literature, the arts. It was a period of massive growth for Macedonia.
A golden age. But those political tensions we talked about earlier, they didn't just disappear, did they? It's like this push and pull, right? Macedonian is thriving, but there's this underlying tension about its place in the world.
Exactly. And when Yugoslavia starts to fall apart towards the end of the 20th century, well, all those questions about Macedonian, they come back in a big way.
Let's unpack that. You mentioned earlier that Bulgaria had some issues with how Macedonian was standardized. What's the core of that controversy?
It all boils down to one question. Is Macedonian its own language or just a dialect of Bulgarian?
Oh, wow. That's a big one. I can see why that would cause some friction.
Definitely. It goes way beyond just linguistics. It's about national identity, shared history, all tied up together. Bulgaria's view is that, Macedonian and Bulgarian are so similar that they're basically 2 sides of the same coin.
Like branches on the same linguistic family tree.
Exactly. And that ties into their shared history, their cultural connections. It's a complex issue.
For sure. So where does Greece fit into all of this? I know they've historically had some objections to the term Macedonian.
Right. So this is where things get even more, I guess you could say, delicate. Greece has a very strong connection to the Macedonia region, going way back to ancient times. So when the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia declared its independence in 1991 and decided to call itself Republic of Macedonia, with Macedonian as the official language, well, it ruffled some feathers in Greece.
Yeah, I can see that. It's like their history was being, I don't know, maybe appropriate is the right word. So how did this whole name dispute actually affect the Macedonian language?
Well, for a long time, Greece wouldn't even use the word Macedonian to refer to the language. They'd call it Slavic or talk about Slavo-Macedonians. It was a way to deal with a very sensitive political situation,
A real linguistic standoff. So how did they ever get past that?
It took a long time, lots of back and forth, but there was finally a breakthrough in 2018, the Prespa Agreement.
This was a big deal, right? What did it actually accomplish?
Huge. The agreement meant that the country changed its name to North Macedonia. And, crucially, Greece officially recognized the name Macedonian for the language. It was a real win for diplomacy, really. It opened up a lot of doors for cooperation between the 2 countries.
That's amazing. So this was a turning point for Macedonian, wouldn't you say? Having your language recognized within your own country is one thing, but internationally,
Yeah.
that's next level.
Absolutely. It really opened the door for cultural exchange. We're seeing more and more universities around the world offering Macedonian language and literature courses, which is fantastic.
Macedonia is taking its place on the world stage. But what about the future? We live in a world where English is everywhere. How does a language like Macedonian survive and, well, thrive in that kind of environment?
That's the million-dollar question. It's a challenge for a lot of smaller languages, not just Macedonian. But technology, it's a double-edged sword.
What do you mean?
Well, on the one hand, you've got the internet, social media, all these things that can lead to like linguistic homogenization. It's easy to feel like everyone's speaking English online.
Yeah, I get it. It can feel that way sometimes.
Exactly. But here's the thing. Technology can also help preserve languages. Think about online dictionaries, language learning apps, digital archives of books and poems, and then there's AI and all the new translation tools. All of this can help keep smaller languages alive and well, accessible.
It's like giving them a fighting chance in the digital age. I love
Yeah.
it. So as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of Macedonian, well, a fascinating language, by the way, what's the one big takeaway you want our listeners to remember?
For me, it's about understanding that language is alive. It changes, it adapts, it's shaped by history, by politics, by technology. And the story of Macedonian, it really highlights that. It makes you appreciate the richness and the resilience of language, how it can endure even in the face of, all these challenges.
Every language has a story, and Macedonian's story is one of perseverance, adaptation, and finding its voice. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. I hope you learned something new today. And hey, maybe you'll even be inspired to explore the Macedonian language a little more on your own. Until next time.